The anticipations. Here we go. Keetra Dean Dixon is a designer, a director, an artist, an educator, I would say product designer after our conversation earlier. And I've admired her work for several years. Her range of work explores translation, mistranslation, communication, miscommunication, and is often prompted by discovery and emergent technologies. She's received numerous honors, including a US Presidential Award. Her work has place in the Permanent Design Collection at SF MoMA. She holds the honor of being an Art Directors Club Young Gun. She's exhibited at Walker Art Center, Cooper Hewitt, National Design Museum, to name a few. And in 2013, Keetra participated in a residency called, it was for brazen experimentation in design processes, or practices, sorry. So I love that quote. And it was called Incongruous as part of the Museum of Arts and Design in New York City. And just this morning, she was concepting for a design for the New York Times. So, sorry.
This is awesome.
And on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce Keetra Dean Dixon.
Hi. Okay, this is important. I'm going to give this to you. Yeah. And let me ask, I feel like there's a lot of movement, audio pickup of, no? Are we okay? Okay, because this will drive me crazy and maybe one or two. Anyone, if you have like, Keetra, stop moving your hair, just scream at me. So yes, thank you so much for having me. And I want to extend a special thank you to Lillian for putting up with so much flack in getting me here, so thank you. And first, actually, I'm gonna do the dirty business of our industry disclaimers. And actually, just for my own curiosity, can I, by a show of hands, see how many architects are in the audience, professional or studying? Oh, a lot of you, okay, awesome. I'm not an architect. I think you guys rock, but just a disclaimer. So the certification that the professional ones of you are seeking from the AIA, hopefully you'll get some information from me, but no promises. And these are my learning objectives, which I had to state in affiliation with architecture, but you can see they're super open and floopy. So, and then another thing I wanted to address is that I was specifically invited and / excited to come as part of addressing the civic realm. And I have done a lot of civically placed work, but as of recent, I kind of got pulled away from civic work, and I had a choice to either really focus on it or show you some process that's over the last year. And I thought the latter was more interesting, so I'm showing that. Okay, enough apologies, and on to the presentation. Yes, so hello. This is some work I do. I do some type and lettering, some object design, and lots of spatial design. And to help explain how I got to do all of this randomness, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. Starting with where I grew up. So I'm originally from Alaska. Do you guys see me? There I am, hiding in the bushes. So this was taken about 10 minutes away from my childhood home. And I grew up in a really craft-intensive household. So my mom was a seamstress and my dad was a metalsmith. So we were always making and building stuff. And then for my undergrad, I went to one of the other places in the US that is colder than where I grew up. And yes, I do count Michigan as colder than where I grew up in Alaska at times. And I got a pretty traditional degree in graphic design. And then after school, I did lots of work as, quote, a graphic designer, but tried to get as many jobs in related fields as possible. So worked in like branding, advertising, interactive packaging, some limited collateral. And then I burnt myself out and went to the Cranny, where we have a lot of family in the audience. Go Cranbrook, yay. And then I graduated in 2006 and still hadn't worked in motion graphics, so I went and got a job as a director and even did some live action direction, so directing people for like TV commercials and stuff. But out of all of these random jobs that I had, there were two really influential ones that kind of clarified what I wanted to do professionally and how I liked working. And the first one came in 1999, right after I graduated undergrad. I moved out to San Francisco, and I went to work for a place called Future Farmers, and they still exist now, and they make really cool stuff, so look them up if you haven't heard of them. But at the time, they were an interdisciplinary collective that focused on both art and design. And, ooh, is that me? Is that always me? Okay, it's my hair. Okay, there, it was all my hair. Okay, I apologize, I've got a lot of it. So they, most of their work was dealing with the topic of environment. And this is actually where I got my first intensive focus on new media, or we called it new media back then. Now we might call it emerging technology. So we were doing installation work and interactive work and experiential work. And their working model was 50% client-driven and 50% arts or self-authored focus. And this was really important and influential for me, this structure. And then the next job that I got that was really important came in 2007. I got an offer to start a lab with the Rockwell Group out in New York City. And they, at the time, were about 200 people. And they're mostly known as an architectural firm, but they also did or do interior design and product design. And their big kind of motive is creating spectacle or pleasure or focusing on craft. So on the upper left here, you have the Kodak Theater in LA. On the upper right is a room at the W Hotel in New York. The lower right-hand side was the Academy Awards TV set from either 2009 or 2010. And then the lower left-hand side is Cirque du Soleil, pretty cool. But the thing that really got me was playground design. So I said, yes, I will join your gang. And I started the lab with these two dudes. The redhead is James Titchener, and the brunette is Joshua Walton. He is also a Cranbrookian, so yay. And on the right, that is their impression of nerdy boys in space. So very good. So the idea was that we would all have one area of expertise with this kind of crossover knowledge into one another's areas. So Josh was software, James was hardware, and I was formal narrative and storytelling. So it was kind of this jack of all trades, master of one model. And I am incredibly thankful for working with these guys, because not only were they really great colleagues, but they're awesome teachers and motivators, and they really helped to build this environment that was driven by curiosity. So here are some final installations that I directed while I was heading with the lab. The JetBlue Ring at JFK. The Broadway musical set for Catch Me If You Can. An install for the San Jose 001 Biennale, and this actually used both virtual and in-person interactions to build this abstract cityscape that was projected on the facade of City Hall. And this was a giant gestural platform and interface that we developed for Google's Paris Cultural Institute that allowed people to navigate through their historic visual archives. Excuse me. So with the lab, I was doing a really wide range of projects. Sorry, I need water. And the consistent thing that we were always kind of blurring this space between the digital and the physical worlds. But each kind of condition for each project was incredibly unique. So I got to do a really wide range of things. So to better illustrate the types of stuff I got to be involved in, I'll show you a slightly more broken down project that I helped direct with the lab. So David Rockwell had inherited this new construction project out in Vegas, so it was halfway built. And it was a hotel and resort. And David Rockwell came to the lab, which at the time was like 15 members, and he said, okay guys, we have this, 3-story blank space to fill. So it was like the ground floor and then a 3-story cavern in the middle of the hotel. He's like, we need a destination, an attraction for people to come to. And this was a part of my job that was kind of in my wheelhouse. So it's that big initial concepting and brand strategy, coming up with that big idea that we're going to shoot towards and visualizing and communicating that to the client. So very tied into my design background. And then after this, it moves out of my area of expertise, and I get to work with these awesome renderers, which within architectural rendering, I think these guys are kind of the unsung heroes because they end up doing so much of the final design detailing in these drawings. I think they're amazing. And I love this one just stylistically. The guy was like, can I put some people crawling like in the middle, right? He was like, a crawl lounge. And I was like, oh, it's Vegas, so sure. And then it moves into model building, so I got to work with these expert fabricators in this really amazing modeling shop, and working with, of course, architects and engineers to figure out all of these beautiful cantilevering structures, and working with interior designers the whole time, in addition to working with the creative technologists and developers and fabricators that are within the proper lab. So I'm learning a tremendous amount, all of which was really inspiring and, of course, educational. And this was actually one of the plans for this project, which I find just graphically really stunning. And then when I get to go to final construction, I know for the architects in the audience, it's like snooze. But for me, instead of going to like a press check or sitting in an editing bay, getting to go to a new build site where I can dress up like a construction worker is awesome. I'll never get tired of this, and getting to see something so grand come together. And even getting harassed by contractors can be kind of fun because I get revenge by like projecting rainbows on them. So after, this was actually a year-long project, which for a graphic design timeline is like, what? But for an architectural timeline is like, what? So this was our final install. This is the chandelier bar that's at the Cosmopolitan Hotel. It's out in Vegas. This opened in December of 2011. It is a 3-story open air inhabitable chandelier that's perimeter is structured out of 2 million strung glass beads. So I loved taking part in these Rockwell projects because they offered this opportunity to be ridiculously inventive and ridiculously spectacular, but most importantly, I got to learn a tremendous amount. And then in addition to doing client-based work, we also did research and development. Our official title was an R&D lab. So doing this general research around the potential application of emerging technology and materials. So it's another 50% client-based work and 50% self-directed exploration model. So super important. And when I was working with the lab, it was before what I did had a really standardized title within the field, so they needed to figure out what to call me. So they called me an experiential choreographer, which I always feel like jazz hands are required for that title. But now there are a lot more people that do what I do, and we are called experiential directors. And after about 4 years of leading with the lab, I began doing this as freelance out in New York City. So I would be, and this slide is way busy, sorry. I would be called in to kind of frame the initial ideas for a project and put together the concepts, put together the right team for it, and then direct that team all the way through to the final install. And usually these projects were really media intensive and kind of blurring that digital physical boundary. But then I also did these kind of self-authored, lo-fi weird things on my own. But then this happened. In April of 2014, I moved back to Alaska, which quite literally plucked me out of that civic realm. And the reason why I moved was a little bit sad. My dad was sick, so it was important that I was closer to him. So I packed up my husband, J.K. Keller, and our 2 pups, and we moved to 5 hours south of my childhood home. So it was kind of just far enough away from my parents that I could kind of stay sane. And we moved about 45 minutes outside of a little town called Homer, for those of you who know Alaska. And we decided that we would go up there and test this claim that these days we can kind of do our jobs from anywhere. But really we are back in the middle of nowhere. We actually live in the back of this mountain range that overlooks Homer. So that, can you see the house? Like barely. So this kind of rural context meant I had to tweak the focus of my job a little bit. But fortunately, our house came with a ton of amazing resources, all of which was totally messy, but amazing. And most importantly, we have the internet. So we thought we could actually make this happen. And I gave myself the first year to just figure things out, to take time and clean things up and recalibrate my entire life and my practice, so kind of take a sabbatical. And the whole process felt really similar to being back in grad school again. So instead of just freaking out, I decided to use a process that I used in grad school to get myself making or used to making in this context. So I started doing these 1-a-day exercises, and here are some kind of embarrassing excerpts from both my grad school time and from my Alaska time. So this process is really reactionary making. And in grad school, I gave myself a 24-hour period to, that's Frankie, a 24-hour period to do a project from ideation to completion. And then in Alaska, I was a little bit looser about those constraints, but the idea is to make really, really quickly and intuitively and get myself to stop overthinking. And when I did this in grad school, I did a whole year's worth of studies. And then I paused, I took some time away from that work, and then I looked at the work with fresh eyes and kind of assessed inherent qualities, how I naturally made work and what I was making work about. And this is actually how I came up with my current list of missions and methods. And these have actually acted as my guides ever since grad school. So these are the missions, what the work is about. And then there are the ways that I make the work. So I realized that the importance of these two lists has actually shifted. I used to be really focused on the subject matter, making sure that I was making work that reflected my voice and put it into the world in a way that I intended and wanted it to live. And now I find that comes a little bit more naturally. And when I looked back on all of these Alaska one-a-days, and really when I stopped to think about all of the work that I've ever made that I've been proud of or really satisfied by, it's all made room for these methodologies, whether it was work I did independently or client-based. These are always the things that coax me to produce newer stuff and take these bigger and sometimes braver, sometimes more naive risks. But these are the things that keep me really excited and engaged in my practice and excited about the potential of it all. So since these are so important, I thought I'd share some work that shows how I make room for these things in my practice. And I did all of these kind of factor into each project in some way, but I forced them into category for sake of presentation. So here we go. So thinking through making. This is very much those one-a-day projects. And just making sure that I allow time for exploration or making with no preset objective and working outside of project parameters and outside of client deadline and giving myself time for discovery and growth. And I've also developed a more kind of directed subset of this thinking through making. So typically with the one-a-days, it ends up focusing on concept. But I also like to do this for form and make sure I'm always developing formally. And I call this subset making through breaking. So simply put, just trying to use things wrong. And this is a method that I do with this dude. This is JK, the husband, very convenient. So with this directive to do things wrong, we use it as a way to lead us through the exploration of traditional tools and materials, new technology, and more ubiquitous tools like Adobe Creative Suite. And we're trying to seek out unexpected results and always incorporate that discovery into our process. So we keep records of these ongoing studies, kind of this accumulating library. And then we use these little seeds of ideas in larger opportunities when they come up. And I'm showing you both these kind of making through breaking studies and some of the more finalized results here. And there's two big reasons that I love this process. The first one is because it gives me a really great excuse to explore emerging technology. I've always felt really influenced by my tools. I find them really empowering, but they can also set these unintended restrictions and really form the way that I think about making. And I like to have a more active participation with where those boundaries form and leverage that influence a little bit more intentionally. And then the second reason that I really love doing this is because it's time that I set aside to just be a beginner again. I feel like sometimes when I get to know something enough to be an expert at it, I almost start to squash potential before it has a chance to happen. Like I'm troubleshooting before I even have a sketch. So with these studies, I can really let naive enchantment lead me and let that curiosity pave the way. And that keeps me really excited about what might happen. Okay, next. embrace the greater unknown. So it's one thing to do the R&D studies, kind of making within the sanctuary of my studio, but it's another thing for doing it for a deliverable that's more public, doing it for someone else in a bigger way. So this is a reminder to be open to a smart level of risk in the pursuit of these larger and more public projects, and to utilize unpredictable mediums and circumstances. Okay, a great example of this happened with a series of projects that started in 2009. So JK and I were invited to make work for a typography show. And we decided we wanted to create an object that showed evidence of time passing and related to an emotional state. So we chose the act of dwelling on something or dwelling on a thought as the emotional state, and then we translated that state into a process and let that process play out. So we chose wax for the medium and started by creating these positive type forms. And then we hand swabbed hot wax onto these forms, layer after layer, literally dwelling on them. So this is a test to make sure it could release, and it worked. And then we hacked together this makeshift layering station out of like an IKEA grid. And at first it looked really good. I call this the glazed donut phase, delicious. But then it took an unexpected turn. It got really, really ugly really quickly. And I stopped taking pictures. So fortunately, we have done a couple more of these pieces since the first one. So fast forward to August 2011, and this is documentation of that. So, I really cannot control my curiosity. So do you see the two mounds that are kind of hopping around the screen? Like that, right there. Oh my gosh, it's like windy in here all of a sudden. So those are these little sample slabs that we build in tandem with this bigger piece, because if I can't pick something up and slice into it to see what's going on inside, I'm slicing into the big chunk, which kind of compromises the larger piece. So it's to correct my behavioral problems. But it helps me gauge the palette that's going on in the big piece, but you really don't know how the behavior of the wax is happening in the larger piece. So you just have to keep going until the guy gets to the appropriate scale. And it is really, they're hideous. And the first time that we did this, I was absolutely terrified. I had no idea if the process would work. Of course, I'd done like candle making before. I knew on a small scale what it would look like, but I didn't know if the structure would hold up at this giant scale that we were trying. And I knew vaguely what it would look like, but self-doubts. So, and of course we were working against this insane deadline, and we just kept going until the day before we had to ship it. And then we were like, okay, it's big enough. And we flipped it over, sliced it down, and we pulled those positive type forms out of it. And here's the first guy. So I was so relieved. So you lose that original thought, that original message, and you're just left with this echo and evolution over time. And this one was called I've Been Thinking of You for a While. And it was 5 feet by 1.5 feet, so kind of like my size, which is a weird way to describe yourself. And not surprisingly, it looks very much like a geode or this like sedimentation layering. And they really, it actually does not photograph well. In person, they're kind of opulent because you get all of this varying opacity, because the more pigment, the brighter the color of the wax, the less light can penetrate the surface. So you get all of these varying shadows within the layers, and they're really stunning. And I love doing this type of emergent work because by letting go of control, I almost feel like I didn't make it. And I can really appreciate the final outcome instead of only seeing like where I messed up. I just get to focus on the beauty, and the flaws are as important to that final beauty as everything else. So I love that aspect of relinquishing control. And then we made one for Obama in the 2009 presidential inauguration show. And one was included in the graphic design now in production show. And I love to include the crates that we have to make for shipping these beasts, because I think people forget about how did this giant thing. So the first one was like 75 pounds. The one in the graphic design show was 200 pounds. And it had to travel around with the show. And the layered wax, you actually cannot put too much pressure on any one point because it will fracture the structure. So we had to do all of this engineering just to get it to the right place and also make sure it doesn't melt on the way. And the first time, since the actual structure was kind of my size, the crate ended up looking like this little coffin. And I loved it because the guy in the gallery space didn't know what was coming. So I was like, that's awesome. He gets this like morbid box with a giant rock inside. Okay, next. Sorry. Is the audio driving people crazy? No, it's just me. Yay. Okay, share the conversation and follow your fascination. So usually when I say share the conversation, I'm talking about participatory work or experiential work or work with this really overt dialogue. But recently I was reminded that these types of conversations are actually embedded in almost everything that we do. So I went to see one of these, this was the show when it was at the Walker. So the graphic design now and production show toured around, and I went to see it while it was at the Walker. And so I was looking at everything and kind of trying not to watch people watching the wax work, you know. And I noticed this older gentleman and these two kids come up to the piece, and I imagined that they were like a grandfather and grandchildren. And the kids were like, ooh, ooh, kind of pointing at the work, and then the grandpa kneeled down and he started miming how the piece was built, like miming this layering. And I was like, yeah, and the kids were like, And then the little boy goes, oh! He like squats over the piece and karate chops it open, right? Or mimes it. And he pauses and like looks up at his grandpa, and his grandfather's like, yes. And the kids are like, yay! And I'm like, oh my God! You know, in the corner, trying not to be a total conspicuous creep. But just then, I realized that I'd been so wrapped up in the practical fabrication aspects of just making the work and thinking about it from this like maybe too heady graphic design perspective and just being freaked out about it living amongst the design gods, that I'd totally forgotten about these aspects that are really important to me, which are providing these accessible moments to anyone and piquing this moment of curiosity or critical inquiry. So to have it come through, even though I'd forgotten about it, and then to have it be this like lovely cross-generational teaching moment was awesome. So I'd been thinking a lot about that, a lot about these accessible moments, and specifically leading people to figure out fabrication. And I'd also been looking for a good excuse to share these beautiful, weird moments that I was finding while we were building the layered wax pieces. Then it occurred to me that I could kind of try to replicate these moments in wax and create an object with them that called attention to its fabrication. So I wanted to use a form that really encapsulated this open, like a curious, totally unrestrained approach to making, to creative authorship. So I started by literally taking these little bits from the layering wax process. Like those are bits that were caught in the bottom of my sink drain. I know that's gross. And I cast those into this colored wax, hoping to create a beautiful tool. So what I ended up making was crayons, but a little bit more grown up. So I sent the first casting of these out to friends, and then I quickly started getting all these retail requests for them. So I kind of frantically went through this intensive process of refining a larger scale production of them and productizing them, and now they're available wholesale, and they're being carried internationally, which is great, and it's all happened really fast and been dreamy, and I'm figuring out how I can, in a smart way, move this forward into a business and be part of something bigger than just making crayons. But there is another motivating thought behind these crayons that the project really hasn't addressed yet. And this thought is also inspired by those layered wax pieces. So once JK and I are done with one of the layered wax pieces and it's shown, we'll put it up for sale, or we'll offer it to someone as material to be used in a new piece to hopefully have them transform it somehow. And every time we offer it to somebody as material, they look at us like we did something awful. They look at us like we kicked a puppy, like we were just committing this horrible crime. And that response made me wonder if my appreciation or love of process and exploration is just totally out of whack with my appreciation for the final product. So with these crayons, I was curious to see how much perceived craft has to go into a tool in order to override its intended application. Like, at what point does it go from tool for use to beautiful object to keep, and kind of see where that line between process and final product falls for other people. And immediately after I sent these out, people were like, oh, I can't wait to see what kind of marks these make, and no, you can't use them. They're too beautiful. So it worked, and I really did kind of highlight this divide, but now I feel kind of bad. Like, I feel like I really should be encouraging people to just dive right into the curiosity and not being cruel and forcing them to make this sacrifice for it. Which brings me to the next thing. Make the work I wish I was making. So usually this is a reminder to always be expanding my self-authored work and illustrating the direction I want to move in. But in this case, it reminds me that if a project falls short, that I can just do it over again. Okay, so this little segment is not a resolved project. I'm just at the very beginning of the process. So I'm using the remnants or outtakes from this crayon fabrication to create these mystery chunks. And that's not actually what I'm calling them. I just don't have the right name yet. So these guys are not pretty on the outside, which hopefully shifts all of the focus to finding out what's inside. And I'm currently kind of figuring out the best way to offer up these chunk forms to people and then gracefully present them with this hidden treasure that's inside. And it should be easy and rewarding and encourage this kind of ongoing exploration. So my first thought is to ask the recipient to choose a chunk and then I can slice them into these raw gems, which the user can then color with to reveal all the good stuff inside. So that's one idea. And then I'm definitely going to offer them up as material in more involved authorship. And one of my goals there is to actually invite more collaboration into my lonely, isolated lifestyle. So one way I could do this is to ask designers to send me their 3D files that they've created, and then I can carve those files out of these chunks using our CNC machine, and we're working on the right rotary speed and drill bits to do this right now. And then I send the designer the results, and this means I get to be part of that cool reveal process. So this will definitely happen. And then also, since this is an in-process project, I thought I would share some of the spin-offs that have kind of come about. So I also attempted to kind of lathe one of these things utilizing our drill press, which was fun and slightly dangerous and probably a lot more breaking than making. But I ended up with a prototype for another non-traditional mark making tool, which is a little top that doodles as you spin it, which I think has potential. And here is where we actually hop back into the civic realm. So my hope in moving to Alaska was that I would still stay really actively involved in this like public participatory kind of direction. But I'm realizing that new clients often see the distance as a little bit too much of a deterrent. So I was getting a lot of work with people I'd partnered with before, but not a lot of new work. But then I got a commission for a public arts piece out in Florida, and these guys are being prototyped, which I'm like, what? So I can't talk a ton about it because we're still ironing out funding, but these are likely to be revised a fair amount to balance out the risk play. They're a little bit riskier than playful right now. But this is a segue into the last project that I'll share with you, which you guys got a little peek at. Am I okay with timing? Okay, cool. And this actually illustrates the way that I usually talk about make the work I wish I was making. So demonstrating the direction you would like to move in. And then also, in my case with the public participatory work, sometimes by illustrating the direction I'd like to move in, I'm also building a lot of trust and proving that I'm not just a graphic designer or a TV director, but I can make objects that people can coexist with or use, etc. So this project started with a smaller scale series that I was doing and installing in public parks. And these were called They All Fall Down the Teeter Swings. And this is intended as a metaphor for navigating social relationships. So the way that they work is that the teeter swings are not attached to their support structure, and there's no limit as to how far the swing can tip. So using the swing is this act of negotiating balance with another person. So you're always anticipating their movement and constantly adjusting yourself. And of course, there is serious risk, especially when you're using leftover parts from your garage, and JK loved that moment. But I worked out all the bugs and got a couple iterations made and installed them in parks and took documentation. And I think I only posted it to my website. And then I got a call from my alma mater, Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and they wanted a new site-specific work that was gonna be part of an event that was affiliated with the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Walker Arts Center. And they cited these teeter swings as an example of what they wanted. But they wanted it to be a little bit safer. And they gave me a choice of locations. And I chose a skyway, which I don't have to explain because you guys know what skyways are. When I talk about this in California, they're like, a what? I'm like, mm. So I came up with a couple of ideas, all of which were what I call 2 steps over the line. So just a little bit further than what I'd ever expect anyone to say yes to. And I sent them renderings, and this was like during a Skype call. And I sent, this is a very humble rendering for the swing hall. And the idea was that these swings would be oriented one in front of another instead of side by side like traditional swings. And the swings would be positioned just far enough apart that people would have to swing in unison to swing at all. And it said really small at the bottom, out of sync swinging results in playful collisions. And I said this and paused, and they said, great, like, let's do it. And I was like, no. Like, you guys, I'm proposing building a crash machine. And they were like, no, it's fine. They were totally amped my confidence, and I was quickly chanting to myself, okay, it's fine, let's just do this. So I got my poor bruised intern to help figure out swing spacing, and this is where all the architects can laugh at me. This is where that like learning paycheck from working with engineers and architects came in. I did like 5 or 6 of these planning documents, which no, I don't know how you're supposed to do these. I'm pretty sure it's not an Illustrator like I did it. So eventually, I did get health and safety and building facilities on board, and they signed off on them, which I still can't believe. And I sent the plans to the build team on site, and they installed it, and I got there, and I was like, man, it looks just like that rendering, which I'm told is unusual, so yay. And the structure was really incredibly sound, but I still had all of these overriding fears of what could go wrong. Like, what if a mom with her baby is on the swing? Or what if a giant guy, whatever. So tried lots of aggressive swinging. And I do have to say, if you guys ever have the chance to swing indoors and like kick a ceiling, it sounds fun. It is so much better than you think it will be. It's so great. Load-bearing tests. No, I'm just kidding. We did actual load-bearing tests. It was 600 pounds per swing, so super sturdy. Lots of additional precautions. The Happy Smash liability waiver, which yes, was legally binding, and you had to sign one and get a wristband to ride. And then I was there with a swing guard shirt on, lots of authority. Even I was like, I'm 5'2", and everyone is listening to me. It's awesome. So then we get to the opening night, and this was actually an all-night event from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. And we ended up with this crazy foot traffic flow. It was far busier than anybody anticipated, and that resulted in the swings always being fully occupied. And so it's also, since it was at night, the skyway is lit internally. So that kind of became a stage. So people would approach the install and they'd see what they were supposed to be doing. And then everyone would come inside and wait in line. And then it would come to be their turn, and they'd all file in, and they'd scooch into these swings, and they'd all face the same way, and they'd get into the start position and wait. And then I'd tromp in and be like, does everybody want to try an NSYNC swing? 1, 2, 3. Oh man, I had the timing perfect before. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! And so it became this really scripted experience. So I was a little bit disappointed at first, but now I love it even more. because now people are mentally prepared for this like chaos of essentially being in this free-form gut of a Viking ship swinging. And they're so willing and happy. And then, of course, all of the onlookers, when you're outside and hear everybody, they're so excited when everyone swings. And the thought of this audience member getting a chance to become the performer, I did really love seeing this inherent behavior kind of emerge out of the structure. So it was still really delightful in the end. And the final install had 24 swings. And on that first night, over an 8-hour period, we had 1,400 swingers and 0 injuries. And MCAD was so happy with it that they paid me some extra money and made it a repeat install. So if you guys ever have a chance and you're in Minneapolis during Northern Spark, come try one of the in-sync swings. And that brings me to the end. And was that okay? I stay here for questions, right?
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Keetra.
Sorry.
Do we have any questions? I know there are some.
Yeah. Yes.
In terms of how those things balance out you as a practitioner and both parties.
Right.
And when I see the work that I just saw with the swings, I guess the question I would try to articulate is, it seems that the work is unbelievably confident and playful, and where do you, when you put something like that out in the world, where are you drawing that confidence from, and how do you generate these ideas and relationships to actually kind of make them living?
Yeah. Oh, the living part. The confidence is a lie. I think that would be the biggest thing. It really does feel like, I think every time there's a new thing, I don't know, even with the crayons, like it's embarrassing for me to be like, I'm making crayons. And I thought no one would want them. And no one, like I definitely am a sufferer of what people are now calling that imposter syndrome. Like when I'm thinking about ideas for an event, kind of participatory install, I'm always like, what is something totally spectacular? What would I want to do? And then it stops being about my ego and my self-doubt and my whatever. If I can just paint an experience that I'm like, that is awesome, then somebody else is going to think it's awesome too. And that rule has never failed. It has to be awesome. And then being smart about it, I do think the confidence is a little bit more, I have been validated enough through practice and through working with architects who actually deserve to be listened to rather than someone who's like, can we get away with it? I think I have learned enough that I know the right people to talk to. I've made good friends who are smart and wise and good at risk taking. And so I look for consultation when I have self-doubt that might put other people in harm's way. I try to never put other people in harm's way. But I do think the self-authorship was never intentional. And I think that is, and the making the money thing, if you can make great work, if you're always making work that is like, if I took enough time away from it that I stopped seeing all the mistakes and I look at it and I'm like, yes, this is awesome. If somebody else made this, I would like it. Then you can share it. And that's the only way. I don't worry about making money, and somehow I've still made a comfortable living. And I don't know how. I'm not a great business person, and somehow I keep getting into these little business relationships. So I credit a lot of the people that I've worked with and getting reinforcement from others and taking enough space from my work to be able to see it through someone else's eyes. And I think that's it. Like, don't listen to your own doubts, because you're probably better than you think you are. So, sorry, that's a kind of a downer answer, isn't it? Yes?
You just said it, you have to take time away from the work in order to appreciate it and
Yeah.
view it objectively.
Yeah.
So what kind of timetable are you found?
It
We've
did.
got a lot of people here who have timetables and 5 weeks to finish up projects.
Yeah.
What-
Oh my gosh, I did have a little stint. So I'm always doing workshops in the academic realm, but I did have a little stint as a full-time teacher. And I do have to say that the amount of work that students are expected to produce and the amount of time they're expected to produce it is mind-blowing. I'm like, oh my God, how did I ever do this ever? But I do think that there is, I have a lot of different buckets of the type of work that I do. So I'm doing like a New York Times spot illustration. So that's a stupid short timeline. Sometimes they'll call and it'll be like, sketches in 1 day and a final in 4 days kind of thing. And for that, I split that first sketch time in half. So I give myself half of that time to concept for it. And then, so basically whatever amount of time it is, kind of 50, if it's the short timeline, 50% of the time to reflect on it before I have to embarrass myself by sending it to the New York Times kind of thing. And that's the same thing with when they pick the final sketch. I pump this thing out as fast as I can and take at least a day. That's still not very much time, and it requires me to make it really fast, because the longer you stare at something, the more inside it you get, and you cannot see it, and the longer it takes to kind of get away from it. And so, then so it all depends on how much time I have, how long it's going to be in front of my face, and then I just try to take as much time away from it as possible. And the realism of the deadline is what dictates that. So, yeah. Anyone else? Oh, it's like a lot of stuff, so.
Well, I think I was going to say, I think the work is amazing. I think you're extremely generous, and I love the presentation.
Thank you.
The one thing I was trying to articulate is the work across the board is always about balance.
Yeah.
I mean, the physical work is about balance, the swing is about negotiation and balance.
Yeah.
It's
It really is all back and forth, and it's all, and I don't think, I think Wes was just talking about this, that how he was talking about the idea of leading a class as a lot of small studies, a lot of quick explorations. In reality, isn't that all our entire body of work? It's just like a blip here, a blip there, a blip there. Yeah, this one might have taken a year and this one might have taken 2 weeks, but it all cycles back into the overall discourse of the body of work. And that's hard. That's a lesson like you never learn how to incorporate it into the moment. You're always just freaking out and just go, 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 make, make, make. But I think I'm always like, have I done this before? Have I seen it before? In the end, it always ends up looking like me. It always kind of has the same voice. So I'm like, okay, I don't even have to think about that. That just naturally happens. And just try my best to do something new and try to advance. It's gonna seem like it's part of a bigger thing that maybe is old to other people, but for me, it's like that discomfort of growth and change is what actually provides the one nugget of acceleration and momentum, so. Also in Alaska, I'm quiet all the time, so this is like more talking than I've done for a very long time.
Thank you so much, Keetra.
Thank
That was
you.
amazing.